Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Behind the Headlines, and in this programme today we shall be marking the first anniversary of October the 7th, the biggest mass terrorist attack in Israel's history and the largest massacre of Jewish people in one day since the Holocaust 80 years ago. And last week we saw that Israel was able to turn this dire geostrategic situation around for its glory, in a sense that Israel took out the terror chief Hassan Nasrallah in his bunker in Beirut. And we'll be asking, has Israel now turned this war around in their favour? And it is what's happened over the past 2 weeks in southern Lebanon on par with the incredible miracles that took place in Israel's War of Independence in 1948, how Israel tripled her size in territory in the Six-Day War, also turning the dire situation around during the Yom Kippur War of 1973, and also the triumph of the Entebbe raid in 1976. Will last week's attack against Hezbollah and its leader Nasrallah go down in Israeli history books, and is this a new era for the Middle East? Reagan, welcome to the programme. It's always an absolute pleasure to do Behind the Headlines with you. I enjoy it very much, and I think our viewers do as well. But I mean, the last 2 weeks have been nothing less than absolutely extraordinary.
Well, cataclysmic, Simon, and it was only 1 week ago that we were discussing very similarly the incredible operation of the pager attack, wherein we see, they've still not really admitted to it as of yet, but just incredible special ops by Israel in taking out up to 4,000 Hezbollah terrorists in one fell swoop, with catastrophic injuries and loss of life, just wreaking justice on these terrorists. And we said in that program that Hassan Nasrallah was on borrowed time, his days were numbered, and that it would, if this continued, if there was not some backing down, it would end in his certain death within weeks or even months. Literally 2-3 days later, while Benjamin Netanyahu is speaking at the UN itself, and he's showing a path to peace, and he has these pictures up of a Middle East that it remains in chains and in darkness through its hatred, or a Middle East that can enjoy liberty and freedom and peace between all. And he's holding this out at this very moment, an incredible operation, pinpoint targeting on a massive meeting between Hezbollah's leadership in a particular bunker in Beirut, destroys Nasrallah.
While they're watching Netanyahu's speech. I mean, the irony of this is absolutely incredible. So let's just remind ourselves of the dramatic events that occurred over the weekend, and we'll also be marking the first anniversary of October the 7th. So we saw over the weekend that Israel turned the evil tide against them with the targeted assassination of the leader of Hezbollah, together with their terror chief Hassan Nasrallah. And what Israel has achieved over the past couple of weeks against this genocidal terrorist organisation Hezbollah is very reminiscent of Israel's remarkable military past in winning its War of Independence against all odds in 1948, its stunning victory in the Six-Day War in June 1967, turning defeat into victory during the Yom Kippur War of 73, and also rescuing the Israeli hostages from the Entebbe raid in Uganda in 76. This will go down as one of the great Israeli military victories that will be remembered for decades to come. We also see that Israel astonished the world back then and is doing so again, and with the IDF actually destroying two of the world's biggest terrorist organisations in Hamas and Hezbollah. And we're asking, what now does the future hold for the Iranian regime, knowing that Israel has them in their sights, and does this usher in a new era, not only for Israel, but for the Middle East?
Well, next Monday, it's hard to believe, Simon, will mark the first anniversary of October the 7th and the horrific massacre of civilians and others on that day. There will be Jewish communities and supporters of Israel across the world that will be gathering to commemorate, to light candles, and to reflect on the atrocities. And yet, I cannot help but think, even as I reflect and remember some of the horrific images and scenes and the grief, the tears, the pain of those days that immediately followed October the 7th, that we're seeing an answer to those prayers for God's just judgment being answered. We've seen protection of Israel against horrific onslaughts. We cannot forget that what happened on October the 7th included an assault by Hezbollah from that day. I remember when the news first began to come through, and I was hearing of what was going on from Gaza, but then it said there were incursions taking place on the northern border. And it seemed like we were about to see a massive operation put into play to try to take Israel from all sides, overwhelming it. God was gracious then. Despite the loss of life, we saw such stories of heroism, such stories of power and courage on full display by Israeli men and women of all backgrounds and from all different stages of life, pushing back against the hideous evil of both Hezbollah and Hamas.
Absolutely. It was like October the 7th. It was like the gates of hell were literally unleashed upon Israel that day. And of course, the Israelis, as we learned last week, call this the Black Sabbath. And it will be a day that Israel will always remember as a dark day in Israel's history. But it's amazing how what looked like certain military defeat has turned into an incredible opportunity for Israel now to reshape the Middle East to its liking, which is, as we know, Israel is a beacon of light in a very dark region of the world. Now, the Telegraph wrote, there was a brilliant article in the Sunday Telegraph under the headline in its editorial, "Israel is winning the war on terror." And this is how they describe October the 7th. They said, yet we should not forget how grim, even desperate, Israel's predicament appeared after the genocidal onslaught of October the 7th last year. That day, 6,000 Hamas terrorists invaded Israel, armed to the teeth. They killed almost 1,200 people in cold blood. Most were civilians, including 36 children. Many were raped or tortured. 3,400 were wounded. Hamas, well, actually the figure's more like 6,000 to 7,000. Hamas took some 251 hostages. 8 have been rescued by the IDF, and 109 were released in exchange deals. The rest are still in captivity or dead. October the 7th was Israel's darkest day. Its military had become complacent, and its future to protect its civilians had come as a shock. They had come close to defeat in the Yom Kippur War of 1973 by failing for the myth of their own invincibility. 50 years later, the IDF horribilis was again followed by a nemesis. Israeli enemies could not wait to exploit its apparent vulnerability. Hezbollah began firing rockets across the border and almost immediately forcing the evacuation of more than 60,000 civilians from the northern Israeli cities such as Kiryat Shmona.
Incredible day, and one of great terror, one of great fear, one of great dread, and yet we've seen in the past year this completely turned around. And as we've gone through, the way I look at it, Simon, is there's been times, there's been seasons in this past year where Israel's enemies could back down, where they could choose life, where this was held out to them. How many times have we had peace deals put on the table? Even Secretary of State Antony Blinken said back in the spring, an extraordinary offer by Israel had been tabled that would be foolish for those against to decline to agree to, and yet we saw routinely disagreement, refusal to cooperate, refusal to discuss, maintaining the hostages, continuing to keep hostages, killing hostages as well, psychological warfare, and every time this was followed immediately by just reprisal. We began to see Hamas's leadership implode. We began to see its top figures assassinated, and now we have this amazing operation that sees the assassination of the Hezbollah terror chief Nasrallah, who for 30 years plus has wreaked havoc on the region and is culpable in the deaths of hundreds of thousands across Lebanon, Israel, Syria, indeed other parts of the Middle East.
And of course has American blood on his hands.
From 1983. And so this goes far back. He has routinely participated in human rights abuses. And this is without even going into how Hezbollah has funded itself, not just from the Iranian regime, but heavily involved in the drug trafficking trade around the world.
Well, what they've been doing for years is actually training the contras in Colombia, the drug barons in Colombia, giving them weapons and training in return for cocaine.
The cartels love Hezbollah.
And then selling that cocaine onto the market to actually fund their terrorism, of course, money laundering operations, gun running operations, anything that's dark and sinister, you name it, Hezbollah are involved in it. But we also have to comprehend that when we look at Hezbollah, it is not just a terrorist organization based in southern Lebanon. This is the world's most biggest sophisticated terrorist organization that has a global reach. It has global terror networks that spread right across the Middle East, into Asia, all across Africa, into Europe, into South America, and also into North America as well. It's truly the world's most terrifying globalist terrorist organization in the world.
But the head has been amputated. It's been severed now. It has, on Friday, the 27th of September, it was reported that inside Nasrallah's bunkers under Beirut's Dahiyah suburb, that the terror chief had been eliminated. Israeli fighter jets dropping over 80 bunker-busting bombs on southern Beirut with the goal of penetrating Hezbollah's underground headquarters and eliminating its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, along with more than 20 terror operatives. 6 buildings were completely flattened in the massive strike, which you can find video footage of. It was truly an amazing sight. The IDF said this took place near a United Nations-run school. Quite par for the course, unfortunately, in that region. The assassination marking the culmination of Israel's 3-decade-long effort to liquidate the leader of the Shia terror group, Nasrallah being at the helm of Hezbollah since 1992, but he had become an elusive target ever since 2006 when he went into permanent hiding, only making the occasional and very non-public, certainly non-advertised appearance to galvanize Hezbollah supporters. Before 2006, Nasrallah traveled openly across Lebanon, delivering speeches, holding meetings. According to Eyal Azisser, an expert on Lebanon from Tel Aviv University's Middle Eastern Studies Department, but during that war, Israel attempted to kill Nasrallah 3 times, according to sources cited by the Financial Times. One airstrike missed him, while 2 others failed to breach the reinforced concrete bunkers where he was hiding. Nasrallah did not stay in one location, explained retired Colonel Shlomo Mafaz, director of the Mir Amit Intelligence and Terrorism Information Center. He had multiple hiding places, all likely within Dahiyah, part of an extensive network of underground bunkers.
The Daily Mail has revealed this incredible article today on page 7. Did spies attack terror leader by dusting him with a chemical? It says here that Israel's assassinated Hezbollah's leader after he was smeared with a chemical agent that allowed spies to track his movement, it was claimed yesterday. Hassan Nasrallah shook hands with an Israeli agent who passed on the unknown substance, according to the Saudi Arabian news channel. The agent would have been an Iranian visiting Beirut when Nasrallah was killed in an airstrike on Friday, news outlet Al Hadath claimed. Security sources have suggested the substance could have been identified by a sensor or a camera aboard a low-flying drone. An Israeli statement on the killing noted the operation had been directed by one of the country's intelligence directives. So even again, I mean, this is just, this is almost like Bond-esque. As we did the story last week about the exploding pagers and walkie-talkies, again using a chemical substance that alerted Israeli drones to the whereabouts of Nasrallah, and using these bunker-busting bombs to actually take him out while he was watching the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech in the United Nations Security Council. Absolutely incredible. So let's have a look now at this excellent report put together by friends at CBN that looked at the assassination of the Iranian-sponsored terror chief and Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah.
After eliminating Nasrallah and most of the Hezbollah leadership, Israeli jets continue targeting the remaining leaders, including a strike deep into the heart of Beirut early Monday. Netanyahu says Israel will continue attacking the terror group and taking on other threats in the region.
We're changing the strategic reality in the Middle East. Changing the balance of power brings with it the possibility of creating new alliances in our region because of a simple reason: because we're winning. Our enemies and our friends return to see Israel as it really is, a strong country, a determined country, a powerful country.
Netanyahu explained why Israel targeted the Hezbollah leader.
Nasrallah was not another terrorist. He was the terrorist. He was the axis of the axis, the central engine of Israel's axis of evil. He and his people were the architects of the plan to destroy Israel.
Islamic jihadists and their allies are mourning Nasrallah's death and swearing revenge. In the Iranian parliament and on the streets of Tehran, shouts of death to Israel rang out.
We want retaliation, a quick retaliation. We will definitely take revenge for Hassan Nasrallah's death.
Throughout Israel and even other parts of the Middle East, many celebrated. Israelis danced in Dimona, and Syrian rebels, who've long been targeted by Hezbollah in Syria, set off fireworks and celebrated. Israel is also carrying out powerful attacks on the Houthis in Yemen after they tried to hit Ben Gurion Airport this past weekend as Netanyahu returned from addressing the United Nations. In a veiled threat to Iran, the Israeli military chief of staff says the Jewish state can reach any enemy, no matter how distant.
We know how to reach very far. We know how to reach even farther. And we know how to strike there with precision.
In the U.S., the Biden administration is still calling on Israel to put the brakes on in Lebanon to avoid all-out war.
Can an all-out war in the Middle East be avoided? It has to do. We really have to avoid this.
Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo disagrees.
We should be saying plain and clear, finish the job. Nasrallah would be alive today if the Biden administration ceasefire had gone into effect. The entire Hezbollah leadership would be alive today if the Israelis had agreed to the ceasefire.
Well, the Daily Telegraph has done an obituary for Hassan Nasrallah, highlighting again a reminder of who he was. He was born on August the 31st of 1960, died September 27th of 2024. He was a militant cleric who rose to become the head of Hezbollah. Hassan Nasrallah, who's been assassinated by Israel, age 64, was a Lebanese cleric and the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Party of God is what that means. The Shia militant group, Shia terrorist group really, which forms part of the Lebanese government. Lines from his speeches were popular ringtones on mobile phones in Lebanon, and taxis would play his speeches on cassettes instead of music. Most Israeli and Western observers, however, denounced him as a terrorist and a religious fanatic. Quite right. Born on August of 31st, 1960, the ninth of 10 children in a Shia family, he grew up in the impoverished Karantina district of East Beirut, where his father ran a corner shop. Hassan Nasrallah attended the Al-Jannah school and later a public school in Beirut, where he excelled in theological studies. In 1975, because of the raging Lebanese civil war, the Nasrallahs moved to Tyre, where Hassan briefly joined Amal, a Lebanese Shia political group with ties to Iran and Syria, from which in later years activists would depart to set up Hezbollah. Age 16, after a stint in a Shia seminary in Baalbek, eastern Lebanon, Nasrallah traveled to Iraq, where he was admitted into Ayatollah al-Sadr's seminary. 2 years later, along with other Shias, Nasrallah was expelled from Iraq and returned to Lebanon, becoming a teacher and a preacher. After the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, Nasrallah joined the nascent Hezbollah, which were a more radical force than Amal, heavily influenced by Ayatollah Khamenei and the 1979 revolution in Iran. In the 1980s, Nasrallah rose through Hezbollah's military ranks, and in 1989 he traveled to Iran, where he obtained qualifications in religious law. Staunchly devout, believing that Islam is not only prayers and praises, rather it is a divine message that was designed for humanity, and it can answer any question man might ask concerning his general and personal life. Back in Lebanon, he was appointed head of Hezbollah's Central Military Command and a member of Hezbollah's Politburo, its decision-making body. Under Nasrallah's leadership after the 1992 assassination of his predecessor al-Massawi, Hezbollah acquired long-range rockets, which allowed it to strike at northern Israel despite the Israeli deployment in its security zone in southern Lebanon, where Nasrallah's Hezbollah also inflicted heavy losses on Israeli troops through an effective guerrilla warfare.
Yeah, I remember the assassination of Hezbollah's first leader in '92. Remember watching that, and then being in Israel in '96. And of course, what plagued Israel so much and concerned so many Israeli mothers was the loss of Israeli lives because of the deployment of IED bombs in southern Lebanon that would blow up Israeli troops. So of course this put pressure on the government to pull the Israeli troops out in 2000. So this leads us on to where we are now. So he said that if we are to expel Israeli occupation from our country, how we do this, he asked, the only way that we have to is to take up arms and fight the forces of occupation. So on May the 24th, 2000, after 18 years in Lebanon, the Israeli forces withdrew in what became seen both in Lebanon and in the Arab world as a whole as a great victory. Nasrallah announced, I tell you this, Israel that owns nuclear weapons and has the strongest air force in the region is more fragile than a spider's web. While fighting the Israelis in southern Lebanon, Nasrallah also invested in his political base, pouring great sums of money into projects in Lebanon's deprived areas, particularly in the south of the country. His guns and butter approach was bankrolled by Iran, as well as Hezbollah's involvement in organized crime, such as diamond smuggling in West Africa and drug trafficking in South America. Acknowledging the importance of media control and looking for a tool to spread Hezbollah's message, Nasrallah opened a television station, Al-Manar, based in Beirut. The channel has an estimated global audience of 10 million people.
Incredible. And what we see going on is that politically Nasrallah had steered Hezbollah into the mainstream of Lebanese politics, where at one point they held 12 seats in the 128-seat Lebanese parliament. So there was some influence there, even on a national scale politically. On July 12th of 2006, Hezbollah guerrillas crossed the border into Israel, killed 3 soldiers and abducted 2. The Israeli response was overwhelming, and that triggered the Second Lebanon War, which went on for 34 days, causing massive damage, especially in Dahia, a predominantly Shia Muslim suburb in the south of Beirut and a Hezbollah stronghold. Nasrallah was a charismatic public speaker. His speech is long and often repetitive, in which Nasrallah would appear dressed in his trademark traditional Shia clerical robes and black turban, were widely viewed and projected on massive screens in public squares in Beirut and elsewhere, usually pre-recorded in his Beirut bunker, where he was sheltering since the end of the Second Lebanon War, fearing an Israeli assassination. He was an avid reader, particularly of biographies. He once disclosed that he had read the autobiography of the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and a book by Benjamin Netanyahu to get to know his enemies. He lived in South Beirut, was married to Fatima Yassin, and they had 5 children. His eldest son, Mohammed Hadi, was killed by Israeli fire on September 12, 1997. When the Israelis released photos of his son's body and offered to exchange it for body parts of Israelis killed by Hezbollah, Nasrallah answered, "Keep it, we have many more men like Hadi ready to offer themselves to the struggle." just incredibly cold and callous. And this is you mentioned his speech there a moment ago and how he would give these long-winded speeches. Anyone who questions the motive, anyone who might be tuning in or come across this behind the headlines who thinks that somehow this guy was a revolutionary, a visionary in a powerful and good way. Lebanon, this is what he said just last year in one of his speeches, Lebanon was a Christian country, but we took it and now it's ours. After we kill all the Jews in Palestine, we will have just begun. We won't stop until every country on earth is ruled by the law of Allah and the people of Islam like our prophet promised. And I just can't help but think that passage that says the way of the wicked will perish.
But he also said, which is also extremely disturbing and also Nazi-like, that he's pleased that all the Jews are gathering in Israel because it means that, that he can destroy all the Jews in Israel and won't have to hunt them down across the world. So again, when we're looking at Hassan Nasrallah, he was the chief of one of the most deadliest and effective terrorist organizations, which was a proxy of the Iranian regime, was part of the jewel in the crown of the Iranian regime. And of course, look at the ideology of Hezbollah, and his ideology was very similar to that of Nazism, and it's that Nazi-esque influence together with Islamic extremism combined with one that made his ideology absolutely fanatical, and his organizational skills will certainly be lost because there's no one that Hezbollah will have to be able to replace him. Also won't have the time to replace him, and so the Iranians, the main sponsors of Hezbollah, will certainly be shocked. So let's have a look and remind ourselves of who Hezbollah are and how they've been engaged in a 30-year battle against Israel. And this is thanks to our friends at the Israeli Foreign Ministry. This is called Iran has been pulling the strings of Hezbollah for years now. Let's take a look.
Hezbollah has been attacking the Israeli people for almost a year now. Thousands of rockets and missiles targeting families, schools, homes. Hezbollah isn't acting alone. This is a war of terror driven by Iran and launched from within Lebanon, a sovereign UN member state. But Hezbollah is not the mastermind. Iran, through its proxy, is using Lebanon as a battlefield, destabilizing the region for its own agenda. Israel stands firm against an enemy that threatens not just its citizens, but the stability of the entire Middle East. Lebanon's silence and Iran's support empower Hezbollah's terror. This war isn't just about Lebanon and Israel. It's about Iran's dangerous ambitions. Israel will continue to defend its people, its peace, and the region's future.
لقد وصف الإمام الخميني إسرائيل وصفا واقعيا ودقيقا جدا ما سماها بالغدة السرطانية، وكلنا يعلم بأن السرطان طبيعته أن ينتشر في الجسد وأن يفتك، وأن الحل الوحيد للسرطان هو استئصاله وعدم الاستسلام له وعدم إعطاء الفرصة له. كالدولة المتحضرة رضوان الله على الإمام الخميني لما سماها الشيطان الأكبر. طوال التاريخ البشري دولة وقيادة متوحشة ونخبة متوحشة كما هو الحال الآن في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. هي إسرائيل في قلب هذه الأمة العربية والإسلامية. هي إسرائيل إذا بتتوفر إرادة لدى النخب، لأن الإرادة لدى الأمة موجودة، ليست أكثر من طعمة آكل. لقمة وحدة بتطلع خالصة. علاقة حزب الله بالجمهورية الإسلامية لقيادة الثورة الإسلامية في إيران، لا أبقى لحظة واحدة في أجهزته لو لم يكن لدي يقين وقطع في أن هذه الأجهزة تتصل عبر مراتب إلى الولي الفقيه القائد المبرئ للذمة الملزم قراره. على مستوى العلاقة العضوية والجوهرية مع قيادة الثورة الإسلامية في إيران وولاية الفقيه،
هذه المسألة بالنسبة لنا أمر مقطوع به.
وعندنا أذكياء وعندنا تقنيين وعندنا ناس متخصصين، وبالتعاون أيضا مع الخبراء في الجمهورية الإسلامية نحن أصبح لدينا قدرة على تحويل صواريخنا الموجودة بالآلاف على تحويل صواريخنا إلى صواريخ دقيقة.
لا يوجد هدف إسرائيلي في البر أو في البحر لا تطاله صواريخ المقاومة. لدينا قدرة بحرية ما بدنا نبالغ، قدرة بحرية كافية لتحقيق الردع المطلوب.
And we have a special guest joining us from Israel today. Not only was he a paratrooper and an officer in the IDF, he's also a paramedic with the Magen David Adom, and he was also a hero on October the 7th. His name is Ophir Tor. Ophir, warm welcome to Behind Headlines, and it was a pleasure interviewing you back in April for the Middle East Report, where you shared with us your remarkable story of how you saved lives on October the 7th. Share for us again what you did and how you managed to save lives when you came face to face with Hamas terrorists in Sderot on October the 7th last year.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be interviewed by you and to your audience in England. About the October 7th, just as a kind of a subtitle, I'd like to say that we're still digesting what happened. It was so impactful, it was so dramatic, it was so unusual, that we're still in the process psychologically, emotionally, of course, and otherwise, trying to deal with the issues that are surfacing as we talk. Only today, I had the first discussion, today, that's almost a year has gone by, with a woman that I saved on that very morning. And what happened was, in that very morning, was that as I drove for my volunteering shift at Mada, that was just before 7 o'clock in the morning, as I was driving along, there was, you have to understand, there was a lot of explosions, noises of explosions, a lot of missiles simultaneously coming and landing all around. I mean, thousands of them at one time. So you can imagine the kind of atmosphere that. So as I was driving along, I heard gunshots. The gunshots were something that is not usual when you have the explosions, because gunshots means that there's some kind of infiltration of enemy troops or enemy terrorists or whatever it is. Normally there won't be gunshots. So as I was driving, I stopped for a moment to understand what's going on. And as I was stopping, two barrels were in front of me, shooting at me from a distance of about 16 meters. That would be about something like 50 or about 50 yards. No, excuse me, 20 yards. Were shooting at me, and I escaped from that scenario. As I was escaping and running along, they were pursuing me. And at some point, they decided that while they were pursuing me, okay, I don't know if they were running after me or they were just walking quickly after me while shooting at my back, they stopped and they went back to the car. What we saw later on in the videos is that they were actually opening my car up, taking things out, you know, having a dandy old time. And I decided that I had no communication to alert the troopers. So I decided to turn back and head towards their direction with the thing of that maybe I could somehow, I wasn't thinking too much actually, I was acting with instincts. To somehow overcome one of them, maybe I could somehow save people. I knew that anybody coming along that road would be shot at. As I was veering towards the side wall, I was under the protection of the building. A car that was driving straight to them was shot at, and I waved. Later on, I learned that it's a woman. I waved. I beckoned them to come to me. I waved to her, and she actually complied. And she drove. She understood that there was danger, so she drove towards me, and that's how I saved her. And today was the first time we actually talked on the phone. She didn't know who I was, and it was very emotional to speak with her. Apparently, the man next to her, I thought was a teenager, but it was actually her husband. So here's vividly, you can see that the actual result of my action that morning. Later on, I met, later on after the events, I met another couple of guys that I saved. While I was escaping from the scene, when they were shooting at me, there was a car driving the way towards me, and I waved him off, and he saw me waving, and he complied as well and escaped from the scene. So there was already 4 people that I saved just with the incident of them shooting at me. After I saved that woman and apparently her husband, you have to understand, this whole scenario is a matter of seconds to minutes. It's not like you can comprehend and absorb. You can see a lot of things later on in the videos. There were videos that were captured by the security cameras of the supermarket. This all happened by this huge supermarket, and there's got security cameras. That's how we can analyze and see what actually happened. Later on, following that scene, I jogged. Jog is not the right word, but I undercover walked, and from cover to cover to the MDA station, and from that on, I participated in saving lives. Obviously, that's what you do with the emergency EMTs, and we had lots of woundeds and deads during the course of the next 30 hours. After 30 hours, the city stabilized. We took care of the terrorists, and I could finally go home and sleep.
Well, that's incredible. 1 year on now from this horrific mass terror attack in the worst really in Israel's history, the biggest massacre of the Jewish peoples in one single day since the Holocaust. What impact would you say this event has had on the Israeli people and the national psyche?
Well, I think, generally speaking, the Israelis have a strong psyche. I think it depends on, if you're not going down to politics, but I think it really is lasered in the focus of what we're up against. Okay, understanding the deep ethical viewpoint on what is life, what is the meaning of life, how do we, where do we take religion to? Do we use religion for good or for bad? It's a belief system, okay? So I think it, in a sense, showed us the nature of the beast, so to speak.
And Afir, can you just reflect on, as a former officer in the IDF and as a former paratrooper, the incredible military success that Israel's having right now against this formidable force, or was a formidable force, and terror organization Hezbollah, particularly with the assassination of the chief terrorist himself, Hassan Nasrallah?
Well, Simon, as you know, I've got background in the military now. As you know, I was an officer in Lebanon, and I served in and out of Lebanon for over 4 years. So I know Lebanon well. I think the impact with Hassan Nasrallah, with the elimination of that figurehead, is going to change dramatically right now. In the near future, the power constellation of the threat. Okay, what I mean by that is that now they're disoriented. Okay, it'll take them back time to regroup and understand where they're heading. Don't misunderstand. This is going to. It's not like we eliminated the threat completely. We disoriented them. Now it's our time to build upon that and to convey our message. And convey our message, I mean the Western thought. Okay, I mean how things should be in perspective.
Afir, we just want to thank you so much for joining us on Behind the Headlines today. We wish you and your family Shana Tova as you celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And we want to salute your bravery and your courage for the lives that you saved on October the 7th due to your quick thinking. And you're a great man. And whenever you're back in London, please feel free to join us here at Revelation TV, and we'd love to interview you again. So have a wonderful New Year. So Shana Tova from us.
Thank you very much.
And Reagan, there's an excellent article here published in the Daily Telegraph. It's an absolute must-read. It's entitled "Israel is Winning Its War Against Terrorism," and this was published in the Sunday Telegraph on Sunday. They said the ordeal of the past year has tested Israelis to the limit, but they have emerged all the stronger for it. It goes on to say that first Hamas, now Hezbollah, in a matter of months. The Israeli Defense Force has decapitated the two most powerful terrorist organizations in the world. Rather than rejoice, however, the West has offered at best a lukewarm support and at worst obstruction and criticism. Yet Israel's ingenious military response shows that it has lost none of its capacity to astonish the world, just as it did in 1948 and in 1967 and ever since. Once again, and with remarkable panache, Israel has transformed defeat into victory. On Friday, it scored perhaps its most stunning victory so far. Hezbollah has confirmed its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was perished in the rubble in the headquarters in Beirut. After 3 decades, has finally paid the price for his crimes and for bringing ruin on his own country of Lebanon.
The lack of moral clarity among our Western leaders. We saw there were some. I was pleasantly surprised to see some of our leadership express Hezbollah, evil terror organization, Nasrallah, definitely a danger to all who love freedom and peace in the Middle East. But there wasn't at all any sense of congratulation or any sense of handout to Netanyahu. There's no recognition of, do you know what, we got this completely wrong. We were telling you, you couldn't do this, you shouldn't do this. The criticism in the past year that Israel has faced due to the loss of life, people parroting nonsense figures that have been churned out by Hamas in relation to Gaza, without any perspective. You would think that anyone who dies in this conflict on the Palestinian side, so to speak, must be an innocent civilian. This is how it's always framed. And any child who purportedly dies must be an innocent. So we're talking about 16, 17-year-olds who are trained up from early to wage war, and apparently Israeli troops are not meant to do anything about that. The same with Hezbollah. There's been this, oh no, we need to de-escalate now. We have thousands of rockets. Why is it always Israel that's being told de-escalate?
I mean, Israel did something similar, I think, in 1981 under Menachem Begin, who took out the Iraqi nuclear facility in Osrink. Israel carried out airstrikes against the Iraqi nuclear power station where they were building nuclear weapons, and the world condemned Israel, even US President Ronald Reagan. But it wasn't until a few years later, literally 8 or 9 years later, that we had the first Gulf War. And had it not been for Israel's incredibly brave and courageous actions to take out Iraq's nuclear program, the US and the Allied forces would then be facing Saddam Hussein with nuclear weapons. And so Israel does these extraordinary things to keep the world a safer place. And there's no doubt that with the assassination of Nasrallah, not only is the Middle East a safer place, but the world is a safer place now. And, and just being able to turn this terrible geostrategic situation around after October the 7th is nothing less than an absolute miracle. Yes, we can thank the Israeli forces for what they've done, the incredible intelligence and the work of the Mossad, the bravery and the courage of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to stand firm against huge amounts of US and international pressure not to destroy Hamas in Gaza, not to take the fight to Hezbollah, and yet we have to thank the God of Israel, because the God of Israel is the one that's delivered Israel. And it feels like we are reading the kind of stories of Israel on old in the Old Testament, where Israel faced almost certain defeat, and yet out of the jaws of defeat, we see that God delivered Israel with outstanding victory. And I do think there is something, a spiritual connection between the end of the 9th of Av, which marks the destruction of the first and second temple, the darkest day in the Jewish calendar, and also the fact as we move towards Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. There's an incredible grace period after this dark day, and something has happened spiritually in Israel, which has actually transformed the nation of Israel, transformed Israel's circumstances in the Middle East, and now it's Israel's enemies that are running scared, including the leadership of Iran, including their leader Khomeini, who has actually gone in hiding because he fears Israeli attacks on his life.
Yeah, I think it's been quite right for Israel to ignore routinely the hostile consensus that has been there among the Western states, the UN. You have people walking out on Benjamin Netanyahu, but very happy to sit there for Mohammed Abbas, who upon hearing of Nasrallah's death, people will say, well, okay, we're not about Hamas, but Mohammed Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, okay, they're different, they're cool. Okay, this is a man who's grieving the death of a terrorist and who sends condolences into Hezbollah's, one wonders who, because they've completely eliminated all of their upper echelon of commandants and individuals who were in leadership. And now there's this power vacuum that's there, but Israel has been quite right to exercise its right to self-defense. No other nation, the UK, the US, who've waxed lyrical in their fence sitting throughout this time, calling for de-escalation and putting burden of responsibility on Israel. Imagine, Simon, if we had not 3,000 rockets fired on, not 8,000 rockets fired on. Imagine if we had 2 rockets, just 2 rockets fired on London by an enemy state. Would we back down? Would we say, oh, we need to de-escalate? We need to
Well, I think under this
engage?
current government, yes.
Well, I worry that you might be right. That's all of us messed up then, isn't it?
Oh, completely.
That's London
Israel has to do what it has to do in order to defend its citizens.
Yeah,
and this article then talks about Hassan Nasrallah and saying this, that as the chief ideologist of Hezbollah, the party of God, Nasrallah once said, if they, the Jews, all gather in Israel, it will save us the trouble of going after them worldwide. His death cult, like that of Hamas, subscribes to the same alienationist anti-Semitism as the Nazis. Nasrallah has not been the only terrorist mastermind in Israel's sights in recent days. The IDF eliminated at least 6 of Hezbollah's senior commanders, including 2 who were involved in the 1983 Beirut bombing attack that killed more than 400 US Marines and other Americans and French personnel. Said even if Hezbollah boasted a strength of 100,000 men and 150,000 missiles is correct, its offensive capabilities have suffered a severe, perhaps irreparable blow. And of course, this is the God that we serve. This is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel. And the God of Israel is Israel's defense. And we see that, particularly over the past 2 weeks, which is nothing less than absolutely extraordinary.
What we're seeing now is Israel emerging so clearly as this strong, formidable powerhouse. And it has been, we've known that. But let's remember, Simon, let's remember that it's not Israel in its own strength. Okay, the ways of the world, the way in which it's all working, the way in which it has faced its enemies routinely, it's not Israel's own strength that sees it through. And we have to remember that it's the God of Israel that is its fortress. And so we continue to pray and recognize the glory of God in working His just judgment and working in and through Israel's leadership. He's working every element of this out to the perfect plan and fulfillment of His purpose.
Absolutely, and of course what has happened over the past 2 weeks is an incredible geostrategic shift in Israel's favour. We've seen that Israel over the past year has destroyed the vast majority of Hamas, destroyed its terror network, destroyed its terror tunnels, and has dismantled this terrorist organisation. And now Israel's done exactly the same to Hezbollah. But the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he now has Iran in his sights. The Times of Israel reports under the headline, PM to Iranians, Israel stands with you. You will be free sooner than you think. In a direct message to the people of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Netanyahu expresses hope for peace, prosperity for both countries. And he said this, every day you see a regime that subjugates you, makes fiery speeches about defending Lebanon, defending Gaza. Yet every day that regime plunges our region deeper into darkness and deeper into war. The Premier said in an English language video, which has also been sent in broadcast in Persian subtitles. Saying Iran's puppets were being eliminated, Netanyahu added that there was nowhere in the Middle East Israel cannot reach. There is nowhere where we will not go to protect our people. With every passing moment, the regime is bringing you, the noble Persian people, closer to the abyss. The vast majority of the Iranians know their regime doesn't care a whit about them. If it did care about you, it should stop wasting billions of dollars on future wars across the Middle East. It should start improving lives.
This is going to be a very interesting time as we see this develop in relation to Iran. The Iranian regime has lost its 2 most powerful proxies here. And what we have with Hezbollah and the implosion of Hamas as well. Iran is now needing to find its own identity, I think, to some degree, without Hezbollah and Hamas involved.
Possibly the Houthis as well.
Exactly. The total chaos and catastrophe there. I mean, it should come as no surprise, but a completely inept fighting force when it comes to making any impact in this conflict.
Well, nowadays there's nothing stopping now Israel from going into Iran and carrying out airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities to ensure that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. Because now they don't have to worry about retaliation. They don't have to worry about the retaliation from Hamas or from Hezbollah, which are essentially the Iranians' main act of deterrence against Israel. But also the fact that Hezbollah is in disarray, and many of our mainstream news broadcasters like to make the fact that now the Middle East is on the brink of a regional war. It's not, because if it was, we would have seen that the Iranian regime would have come to the defense of Hezbollah. And it was only back in the summer that the Iranian regime made a very clear statement to the Israelis saying that if you come after Hezbollah, we will get involved in this war and we will come to the defense of Hezbollah and attack you. Now, the Iranians are running scared, and in the Middle East, that speaks volumes, because those Hezbollah terrorists who are still alive will not have the same motivation and the drive to defeat Israel, because they will fear that they don't have the protection any longer of the Iranian regime. And now it's Israel that has emerged as the strong horse in the Middle East. And many nations like Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern states will now make peace with Israel, because they see that Israel is the main powerhouse in the Middle East and can actually then push forward and really confront the darkness, the evil and the tyranny in the Middle East today.
So what we've seen in the past year is nothing short of spectacular, even miraculous. We've seen Israel go from a point of absolute demoralization, rampant destruction and distress, to a place of what looks like at this point absolute victory over its enemies. Truly, the way of the wicked will perish, and we know that the Lord will continue to keep His people. He will continue to work out His promises, even to Israel to this day.
No, absolutely. And what's so remarkable is the fact that Israel's now destroyed two of the world's most deadliest terrorist organizations in Hamas and Hezbollah. And the Western world owes Israel a debt of gratitude, because not only has Israel defeated her enemies, but she's also protected the West from this evil and vile ideology that is Islamic extremism, particularly coming out of Iran. And we know that Israel has Iran's leadership in its sights.
Truly, God is Israel's defense, and we know that as He works out His perfect plan and purpose, this isn't the end of the story. Simon, you and I will continue to talk about and see and reflect on what God is doing in that part of the world as we await the return of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, as we await that total victory over death and all of its forces. And that's something that we're looking forward to. Truly, God is great over Israel.